All right, Unit 3, macromolecules. So in this unit, we're going to be talking about macromolecules, which are organic compounds. The term organic in science just means that it contains the element carbon. So it's a little different than when you think of the food term organic, which means it's naturally grown, doesn't have pesticides, those kinds of things. But in science, it just means that it contains that element carbon. So humans are organic. Really, anything that can decompose has carbon in it and is organic. So macromolecules are large organic molecules, and we also call them polymers. So when you see macromolecules and polymers, those are kind of the same things. So carbon has 4 valence electrons in that outer shell. Therefore, it can form 4 covalent bonds with as many as 4 different elements. And usually it likes to bond with another carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, or nitrogen. Those are its favorite things to bond to. Carbon is the only nonmetal that can do this, so it's really unique in that sense that it can form these different bonds. Example would be C6H12O6, which is sugar. All right, so again, macromolecules are large organic molecules, also known as polymer, but they're made up of these smaller building blocks, which we call monomers. An example is carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, or nucleic acids, also known as DNA and RNA. So let's talk first about carbohydrates, the macromolecule carbohydrate. It is a compound. It contains carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and usually in that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. So we just talked about C6H12O6. This is a carbohydrate, it's a sugar, and if I reduce these to kind of the lowest common denominator, I could divide them all by 6. This becomes a 1, this becomes a 2, and this becomes 6 divided by 6 is a 1. So here's that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio I was talking about. All right, carbohydrates are small sugar molecules all the way to large sugar molecules. So there's kind of this range of small to large. The examples of the smallest one is a monosaccharide. Then a medium-sized one, or pretty small still, is disaccharide, all the way to these really large sugar molecules called polysaccharides. So think of saccharide as meaning sugar, and then mono 1, di 2, poly 3 or more, or many. Their functions are they're the quickest source of energy we can get, all the way, those are the small molecules, are really quick sources of energy, all the way to short-term energy, which is our polysaccharides. So let's talk about what the monomer, it is a monosaccharide. It's 1 sugar unit. Our examples are glucose is kind of most common. It's found in candy and ice cream. But we also have fructose, galactose, deoxyribose, and ribose. Those are all different types of monosaccharides. And so here I have my drawing of glucose, but I could, and that's a monomer for a carbohydrate, but I could just as easily change this into something called, fructose, or it could be DNA, deoxyribose, which is in DNA. Now it might change the shape, it might not be this quite shape, but it is just one single sugar unit. Right, so here's our second type of carbohydrates, disaccharides, which are di meaning 2, so 2 sugar units. Our examples are sucrose, lactose, and maltose. So sucrose is just table sugar. Lactose is glucose and a galactose. So if you're lactose intolerant, that means that your body can't digest that very well. And maltose, that's found in barley and grain, and that's glucose and glucose bonded together. So this example right down here is a glucose and a glucose, so this would be considered maltose. But if one of these changed into, another galactose, now it would be lactose. All right, a third type of carbohydrates are polysaccharide, poly meaning many, many sugar units. Examples, these are larger carbohydrates, so starches, which are found in breads and potatoes. Glycogen, which is found in beef muscle. And cellulose, which is found in lettuce and corn, these tend to take a little bit longer for our body to break them down to get the energy. So they're a little bit more short-term energy instead of kind of immediate energy sources. And here's what it looks like. All these different monosaccharides. Now again, I have glucose here, but that could simply very well be a galactose or fructose in replacement there. Okay, lipids. Lipids is the general term for compounds which are not soluble in water. Their main function is to store most long-term energy. So our examples are fats, phospholipids, oils, waxes, steroids, and triglycerides. Phospholipids we'll talk about later on in the year when we get to the cell membrane. I think that will come up next unit, actually. So the 6 functions of lipids, they could be for long-term energy storage or protection against heat loss and insulation. So you'll see animals that live in really cold environments like walruses, they have lots of lipids or blubber or fat tissue to help them regulate their body temperature and insulate. Protection against physical shock. So anytime we do dissections, we'll see like layers of lipids that are surround some of these organs that help protect against physical shock. Protection against water loss. Chemical messengers can be sent through our lipids. Major component of cell membranes, also known as phospholipids. So here is a triglyceride. We're going to show a picture. That is one glycerol and 3 fatty acids. This is the monomer for a lipid. And here's the glycerol. And then here are the 3 fatty acids. And they kind of look like ribbons attached to this glycerol end here. Kind of look like they're ribbons attached here. So let's talk a little bit about those fatty acids because there's 2 different types that we see on food labels. We see saturated fatty acids, which do not have a double bond. They tend to be not very good for your body. Usually are solid at room temperature and usually are derived from animals. And then we have unsaturated fatty acids that do have a double bond. They tend to be better fats for our body, liquid at room temperature generally, and derived from plants. So saturated fatty acids example could be lard, grease that has solidified after it cooled, or butter. And unsaturated fatty acids examples could be olive oil or some other type of avocado oil or vegetable oil. So here's our drawings here. This is a saturated fatty acid. You're going to notice there's no double bonds between the carbons. Yes, there's a double bond right here, but we're talking double bonds between these carbons, and there's none there. And here's a drawing of an unsaturated fatty acid, and you're going to see that there is a double bond right here between these carbons. Okay, proteins. Proteins, also known as polypeptides. The monomer is an amino acid, and there are 20 different kinds of amino acids that are bonded together by these peptide bonds. That's why they're called polypeptides. There's 6 functions of proteins for storage, like the egg whites, albumin. Transportation, so in our hemoglobin we transport proteins. Regulatory, in our hormones. Movement of muscles. Structural, like the membranes and also in our hair and nails. And then also enzymes, which start cellular reactions in our body. So proteins, there are 4 levels. We have primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. Okay, primary structure. The amino acids are bonded together by peptide bonds in this straight chain, and that's what it looks like. Secondary structure, there's three-dimensional folding of the primary structure that's into coils or pleats, and they're held together by hydrogen bonds. So if you remember in class, I took that paper and I folded it into a fan. That's what a pleat looks like. And a coil is kind of like a spring. So here's our two examples, an alpha helix and a beta pleated sheet. And those are hydrogen bonds that keep them in that shape. Just to reiterate though, they still have the amino acids, they still have the peptide bonds. Right, tertiary structure, this is the secondary structure is bent and folded into a more complex 3D arrangement of linked polypeptides. We call this a subunit, and this is what it looks like. And so it's pretty confusing, but we still have our alpha helix coils, and we still have our beta pleated sheets. Quaternary structure, this is composed of two or more subunits. They're globular in shape. Examples could be enzymes that are found in the hemoglobin. And here's an example right here of a quaternary structure. Now this one happens to have 4 subunits, but it could just have 2 and be fine. Those are the subunits. There's 4 in this one. Nucleic acids. The monomer of a nucleic acid is a nucleotide. There are 2 types. One is deoxyribonucleic acid, also known as DNA, and has a double helix. The second type is a ribonucleic acid, also known as RNA, and it is a single strand. Nucleotides include a phosphate group, a pentose sugar, which is 5 different carbons. Remember, each carbon can make up to 4 covalent bonds, but these are 5 different carbons. And a nitrogenous base. So the nitrogenous bases could be adenine, thymine, uracil, cytosine, and guanine. And just notice that thymine is only found in DNA and uracil is only found in RNA, but adenine, cytosine, and guanine are found in both DNA and RNA. So what does a nucleotide look like? The monomer. We have our phosphate group attached to our sugar, pentose, which is 5 carbon sugar. And you can see the little red numbers here. This is the first carbon, second, third, fourth, and 5th carbon. Okay, and that is also attached to your nitrogenous base. Now notice it has adenine, guanine, cytosine, or thymine. It does not have uracil, so this must represent a DNA. If it had, instead of thymine, if it had a U, now it could be representative of an RNA. All right, so DNA has a double helix, so here's one side, and here's the second side, and they're connected by these nitrogenous bases. And so it kind of puts on this like ladder type appearance with the rungs or the steps of the ladder being the nitrogenous bases. So these are the nitrogenous bases. So if we look at the nucleotide, this is all one nucleotide. Here's a second nucleotide. Here's a third nucleotide. And here's a 4th nucleotide. And that's it for Macromolecules Unit 3 Biology Shock video.